Hello and welcome back to When Hope Endures with Mabel and Wesley Sellers. We have Ian again with us to talk about the next part of his story, talk about rehabilitation and the therapies that you went through, both in the hospital and after coming home.
Yeah, still ongoing, but very intensive right off the bat. I remember the first time standing up out of the bed, and my brother was there, just kind of helping and stuff with support with the therapists. And he looks up and he's like, "You've grown." And yeah, I tried to stand up as best as I could with the posture, and like you have to reteach your muscles. Like, okay, I gotta flex my hamstrings, now my quad, now the glutes, and so you're focused on having good posture. But I was well above him as far as height goes. So I was like, oh, there we go. So that's kind of cool. But
is he older or?
He's older, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and he's always been a little shorter, but he was a lot shorter by about an inch. So that was fun. But yeah, I started, let's see, Sunday night is kind of when things stabilized, and immediately they had a physical therapist in there with one of their aides just to get things going. There's the phrase use it or lose it. At this point I'd kind of lost stuff, but the point is to kind of do the reverse. To once you've lost it, use it to get it back.
Right.
And just to kind of retrain the brain and say, oh, well, if this pathway's knocked out, let's find another pathway to get those muscles firing again. I did a few exercises for cognitive functions, and they immediately were like, oh, you're good there. I did speech for quite a while. My speech therapy, by quite a while, I mean probably 2 weeks, so not that long actually. It came back pretty quickly, thankfully. There's still things that I struggle saying, like if a word has too many consonants in a word, it's difficult. So I mumble quite a bit if I'm not like really trying to enunciate and stuff.
Is that because of the tongue muscle that does that?
Yeah, it's almost like it's lazy. I think I've always mumbled, so now with this it complicates things. Also, like TMI, but I have an overactive salivary gland, so that doesn't help either. I have to constantly like be swallowing and stuff.
How about
not stroke related? That yeah.
How about with eating on that? I didn't ask the question in the previous, but I've noticed that from people we've talked to with our experience as well as the people we talked to before, that usually after a stroke, they give you blended up or more easy to eat foods because they aren't sure if you're going to be able to swallow. Yeah. And with you losing some of the tongue.
And so, yes, initially they gave me like an Ensure, one of those drinks, and then like very soon realized, okay, you can have the full menu. So I was living life in there with all the food they had as options. It was great.
So your tongue doesn't give you any trouble with swallowing or with eating then?
Oddly enough, it didn't.
Wow.
The speech was, and if I look back at videos we have from the hospital, like totally unintelligible speech. It's like the tongue didn't even work at all, but the throat and everything else was fine. I mean, I could move it enough because the left side was still totally intact as far as muscle movement goes, that it was enough to eat properly. And so again, very fortunate, because I know a lot of people aren't as fortunate to have to go through the eating phases and relearn that side of things. And I relearned it to an extent, but it came back pretty quickly. And I think just because it's used so frequently that it relearned fast.
I just had no idea that was part of speech therapy, that fell under speech therapy was the ability to use the tongue, or ability to swallow and everything as well.
That was a big one. I remember Tim, the speech therapist, came in and he had me yelling to try and like reactivate the throat and everything. And then soon after that was like tongue movement exercises, and with that was like almost like a checklist type of thing of eating, like okay, does this food. So for me that was it. I only ended up seeing Tim a handful of times, and then I graduated. My voice is still a little soft, so like to enunciate and really get words out, it's a stretch for me. And I don't know if I think that is stroke related, but it doesn't affect things, thankfully. But occupational therapy, they were in there from day one as well, just trying to get me to raise my arm, and they would tap my muscles really quickly to get it firing, to get the receptors there, or activate the receptors. Yeah, and so for that the first week, I'd say actually, so from Sunday to Friday, it was a struggle. I was using full assistance from others to be able to stand up, to lift my leg, to move the leg. I mean, there was full paralysis on that side, and within a few days, stuff started coming back. The arm was very slow to come back. The leg came back a little bit quicker. I think the muscle groups are a lot larger and not as fine movement. So that helped because it didn't require as many neurons to get the communication there from the brain. And so they would come to my room twice a day to do exercises, either walking down the hallway or literally just standing up and trying to do some trunk twists. That was the extent of it.
Wow.
And then the occupational therapy, I was still lying in bed, and she would come and help me try and move my arm or lift my arm or move my hand. And I remember there's a video we have of her lifting my arm, and she would like drop my elbow, and I would try and hold it up there, and she would like poke at my bicep, like go 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 go, and just to try and keep my arm extended at a vertical position. It was tough. I remember just thinking like trying to focus all the energy to try and get it to move, and it wouldn't. Just a weird, unique thing that is hard to describe. But the other side of that is I had a little bit of sensation loss, and the way I describe it, and I don't think this has ever changed from the hospital. So even to this day, it's almost like as if you're wearing a latex glove and someone touches that. It's like you can kind of feel it, but it's not all there. Okay. And that's kind of how it is on the right side of my body in most areas. Some places, like the face, is a little easier to tell, but like if I have a shower going and the water's solely on that side, I can just feel there's pressure there. It's just weird. But that was the extent of the therapy in the ICU. I then got moved to the inpatient rehab for the hospital. It was inpatient neuro rehab specifically. And this is where I kind of like realized, oh, I'm unique here because everybody else was so much older than me. And I was young and super athletic. The days prior to the stroke, I had gone on a run. I think it was a 3-mile run. I'd run that a 3-mile race, I guess, from a race myself. It was 19 minutes. So it was pretty quick.
Right.
And I used to be that, but moving to rehab, they said that was actually probably super beneficial because of that athletic background. I could navigate muscles and balance a lot better than maybe the average. I don't know. I'm seeing that, but that's what they had said. And so there in inpatient rehab, I had a room up a floor, and same thing. They would bring. I'd go to the cafeteria for meals there in that little inpatient rehab area, and then twice a day I'd have physical therapy. Twice a day I'd have occupational therapy, and then once a day speech therapy for that first week there, and then I dropped the speech, and then I would do so basically 4 hours of therapy every single day. Physical therapy was walking, standing. It was just moving from a sitting position to standing and then walking down the hallway and or walking with what looked like the balance beams and then trying different devices, whether it was a walker like the ones with the tennis balls on the bottom, that type of walker. Then from there is using stairs to try and navigate the stairs. Foot drop is a big issue that I have to this day, and what that is, it's just the ankle mobility isn't there, so my foot literally just drops, and so it's like my toes can dangle and cause tripping.
Uh-huh.
Huge issue initially just because there was still a lot that I didn't have. By that time, the paralysis was wearing off and it was becoming more paresis, which is
Hmm.
just the term for partial paralysis. And that's kind of what it is today, still partial paralysis. But going from full paralysis, literally not able to move the right side of my body, to where it is now is night and day. I mean, I don't need to use those devices or yeah, like the canes, the walker, that wheelchair even.
Right.
But while in inpatient rehab, I was still getting wheeled to physical therapy every day just because of the
Hmm.
liability. I'm not talking on them like financial, but to myself.
Right.
Um, Getting to the bathroom, still needed a wheelchair. Transfers were fun. Transfers, just getting from one spot to another. So from the wheelchair, transferring to my bed, or from the bed to the wheelchair, or the wheelchair to the toilet, etc.
Right.
And that was the bulk of the occupational therapy, was just the day-to-day stuff that we have to do, whether it's getting ready for the day, showering, going to the bathroom. Funny story on that one is I remember one of the first times where I was like left alone to go to the bathroom. My stupid arm just dropped straight into the toilet and I didn't even feel it. So it's like, ah.
Oh.
Luckily that was before I'd used the toilet. It was
Right.
like, I was like, oh, that was a learning curve. That's not happening again.
Hmm.
I wore a sling for a long time. And the reason for that was to prevent shoulder subluxation,
Uh-huh.
so that the shoulder would stay like
In
put
place.
in
Right.
place.
'Cause
Perfect.
all that weight of your arm
Yeah,
constantly
exactly.
pulling against it.
Yeah,
Right.
and it could
Wow.
cause damage. So
Didn't even think about that.
yeah, that was a big one that I used. I mean, it's like if you sling it, if you were to break your collarbone, it's the same
Hmm.
looking thing. And so doing exercises, whether it's like having my hand in a like a just a normal winter glove and trying to slide it on its own on a
Hmm.
table, or like washing a horizontal car window, just doing little things, which is it was so mentally taxing because he couldn't do it, and it was. I mean, going from where I was and not to being a good athlete,
Right.
so controlled over my body and the fine movements and things like that, to not being able to use it was the pinnacle of frustration for me,
Hmm.
like just a mental prison. But perspective again was huge, just because I know there are other people that, I mean, talking about mental prison, weren't able to communicate. And I
Right.
still had that. So it was a weird transition in life toward, yeah, I was still going to physical therapy, occupational things, but I realized the physical side of life isn't going to be the same. So I need to transition and have more of
Hmm.
the mental side. And I could still do that and still, I mean, I was super competitive, so I could still excel there,
Right.
is what I was getting at with that. But the physical therapy was huge, just because I think it helped build confidence, not only get function back, but build confidence to see gains.
Uh-huh.
And so I was in the ICU doing physical therapy, occupational speech, and then inpatient therapy, physical occupation speech. After the first week, I no longer had speech therapy. I continued with physical occupational for one more week there.
Mhm.
And on August 29th, they discharged me. And I left the hospital with only a cane, which
Wow.
is fantastic. Yeah, really, really big. And going from full paralysis on that side to, uh, I mean, still limited function, but I mean, I could do it all myself
Within a
which is
couple weeks.
within a couple weeks,
Yeah.
which is incredible. Um, and then from there with physical therapy, I started occupational, but I kind of graduated from that because I
Mhm.
could do a lot of that on my own. But I came back twice a week for 6 months. About 6 months as one of their maintenance physical therapy
Mhm.
goers. So it was more almost like a gym membership, essentially, where I'd go and
Right.
use their equipment. Um,
So that's so you didn't, because you talk about if you don't use it, you lose it. Was that so you would maintain the movement there and
yes.
not kind of fall out of the habit of
Yeah.
using it and then regress?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to use that word. don't want to regress at all. And then the hope in doing that was not only just not regress, but also progress.
Right.
And so learning new exercises. I remember one therapist who he actually passed away not that long after I was discharged, but he knew I was a runner and he was a runner. He said, "Let's get you running." I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, maybe a couple months from now. He's like, "No, we're doing that this week."
Wow.
This was like 2 months after being in the hospital. It was like a Saturday morning. No one was there. And I was like, okay. He said, well, we're going to start you on the treadmill with the giant diaper harness thing. So I could, if I did fall, I was still suspended in the air and didn't have any risk or anything. But I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, like this fast getting back to this? And it was running, quote unquote, but it was still
moving.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, he just really stretched me. I remember like thinking like, whoa, that did a lot for me. Just pushing me to that level because I hadn't done that myself, and no one around me really had done that to that extent.
Right.
So that, I think, little lessons from the stroke, for me, that one's a big one. Push yourself even farther, and not just stroke related, and life.
Right.
And the amount that you learn, maybe you don't get to that full 100% running, which I don't think I ever will, but I'm still doing it. And I mean, that's just a little lesson that I feel like I've learned in life in general since this is just push harder. And yeah,
it's an amazing mentality to have.
Yeah, yeah. You don't have to have a stroke to get
right.
Yeah. But yeah. So that was a big one. And then I was on the maintenance program until I went back to school, and then I was at their physical therapist for another 6 months, and this is twice a week. Same thing, kind of a maintenance type plan. And he was a physical therapist, not trained in the neuro side of things, but the guy was so innovative. He would put out like pennies and nickels and dimes. Okay, pick those up and just like leave me alone. Like trying to do that with a mostly paralyzed hand was torture, but just so good as well. And then he would stick me on an arm bike to get the arm moving and use the muscles with the resistance and everything. Then get me on a normal bike, well, a stand-up bike, a stationary, that's the word, to again use the leg and get that going. He'd have me doing lateral movements. And yeah, so it's just, I think looking back, a pattern of continually pushing and thinking of new ways to challenge myself physically was really great. Going back to school, I think, was another form of therapy as well, just because it was getting back to normal life and realizing that this wasn't anything permanent in the sense like I'm not going to be in the hospital or down or whatever. I can do normal stuff.
Right.
And then associating with other people that are in similar situations, going through medical things and learning how do they navigate this and seeing how they do it. Like, oh, I can do that. One thing that was huge as far as therapy goes is they said that the function of my right hand might not ever return, which I never really struggled with that, oddly enough. My dad did. He almost bit the doctor's head off that said that. Like, hey, you can't say that kind of stuff. But he's setting expectations. But for me, it wasn't a struggle. The big thing, I think, reason why is because right after that, January, so stroke was August, January, I had a calculus class. And there's a lot of writing in that.
Yeah.
And so that poor calculus teacher had to read my illegible left-hand writing. So I quickly learned how to be left-handed. And honestly, from there, haven't really looked back, and it's been a smooth transition, really, to the point where the occupational therapy is not an issue just because the left hand has become so dominant now. So it's the occupational therapy for me was kind of a short stint because life just happened and I was able to get back to, like you mentioned, with taking care of your baby again because that natural stuff just comes to you. And I think that's another thing with recovery in general, like just don't neglect the recovery, but get back to stuff life as quick as you can. For me, that was a big learning curve. Like, oh, this is actually super beneficial.
Life can sometimes be the best occupational therapy you can get, right?
Seriously, and it's free. So, but yeah, that was good.
I find it interesting that because you do have the neurophysical therapists and then you have regular physical therapists. It's so interesting to think that, sorry, the lack of movement in or the ability to control your arm or your leg is cerebral and nothing to do with muscles. It's not like there was an injury in your arm or your leg itself.
Crazy.
It's all just in your mind's inability to
Tiny space.
Yes, that's just
right in that tiny little skyrise or whatever, right? Feeding it out. But it's there in the mind, not in the muscle itself. And that just blows
right
my mind in a sense.
Even thinking about that, just you describing, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and I know that, but it's just puts it into perspective again. It's wild, right? Like, yeah, all the physical things, I mean, they're all up here first. They're all in the brain. Everything. That's why it's so important, so valuable. Wear your helmets, kids.
Yeah.
Like it's everything. And like you said, it was such a small area. But yeah, the effect is huge. Effect is large. One thing I thought about is actually no, go for it. What were you gonna say?
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say being with that physical therapist and being with the neurotherapist, I actually feel like there wasn't too much of a difference, which is really cool. And I think a testament to him. His name was Steve. Just because he tried to be creative and think of different ways to do stuff. And I think that's also like we can all do that at home as well. Just think of different ways that we can adjust or challenge ourselves. And I think it was a big credit to him. And I was with him for probably almost a full year. And so that was something that, again, was huge for me, just because he was so positive and so willing to just, hey, let's try something new.
Right.
And it was just great.
And your willingness too to try something new, because I work at a physical therapy place, and there's so many people that they didn't have a stroke, but they had a shoulder surgery or replacement or whatever, and they don't want to do it. Well, they do want to do it, but then they're like, oh, but it hurts, and or I tell them, hey, it's this way, not this way, it's different muscles, and they're like, well, okay, and then they do it the way they want to instead of the way it is, you know.
How is this gonna help? Like that mentality of
how is this gonna help?
And honestly, I think that is like half the battle as well, just the willingness, not to toot my own horn, but I think that has been a big thing for me. It's hard for me to get down, and I think perspective is big for that. But every day is frustrating.
Right.
Carrying groceries and dropping something or tripping over things is a daily issue. And it's frustrating in the moment, but it's so key to recovery, because if you have that mental block and you're not willing to do those physical therapy exercises or whatever it is, you're not going to progress, unfortunately. Or you maybe will, but not to the extent that you should or need to or want to. So, I interrupted your question. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I'll come back to that. But again, to your physical therapist, he didn't just give in and say, well, this isn't the type of physical therapy I deal with. He wasn't saying, no, I don't deal with that, and then just send you off somewhere else. No, he was willing to try things and to make it work still. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, right? Shows the kind of guy he is. Just to be willing to kind of take on the challenge that, he could have easily turned away. So, yeah, huge help. And looking back, that was a big piece for me. It was a full year of physical therapy almost, that's a lot. It's a lot of time dedicated on his part, and so it was big. Got me through an odd transition of going back to school and finishing there. So
that's awesome.
When you were in the inpatient therapy, you just got done from the ICU, then the hospital portion. It was 4 hours a day, and some people may think, well, it was only 4 hours a day, but post-stroke the people we've talked to, you're really exhausted as well. So how was the exhaustion or the tiredness during that time? Because your body's doing a lot to recover that, and
so much,
and your brain
and
is
your brain
trying to remember things.
Oh boy, yeah. No, I think about this to this day. If I try and go, like most people, for example, they talk about going on a run, being able to just check out and get that runner's high. Not a chance that's happening for me, because I have to think, okay, my quad, my glute, my calf, my ankle, my foot, like it's a mental workout. Physical therapy, even more so, just because of how fresh everything was.
Right.
Huge. And I mean, we've all experienced days where we're physically exhausted after doing like yard work or playing something. Like you feel it, but it's different when you're mentally exhausted. Like the will to like do stuff is like, I'm done.
Right.
And that's it's a combo of both, which is just grueling. But it is that, because you have to think, okay, I need to somehow focus everything on firing my quad right now to stand up, or my hips out of place, like get aligned. So it's like you're just constantly just trying to keep tabs on every appendage, every muscle fiber.
Right. Stuff we do on autopilot and don't even think about it.
Don't have to think about it.
We need to rethink the autopilot, or like, we don't have the autopilot for a little while.
Well, and I remember you in your podcast episode talking about when you are on autopilot, like writing down your phone number, it comes automatically, right? But then when you actually have to think about it, it's so much more difficult. It's the same thing, right? And trying to, like, if I am doing like a run or something and I intentionally, okay, don't think about it. It's easy. It's fine. But as soon as I like try and think about it, it's like everything gets out of whack.
Right.
Realign. So it's like, it's so taxing and mentally exhausting. So those 4 hours, I don't even remember what I did the rest of those days, just because I feel like I probably slept. I checked out. But it's worth it for sure. It's always difficult. I mean, for anyone going through recovery, I mean, talk about shoulder surgeries in general, like those, painful, tough, but absolutely worth it. But exhausting for sure. So exhausting. I'm trying to think, even like, my wife was just starting in school at that point. Oh, so she started school like 2 weeks after I had the stroke. So while I was in the last week I was in inpatient rehab, she was going to school full time as a dental hygienist. So that's a 40-hour school week. Right. And so for her to come back and check in on me and do her homework up till like 11:30 at night out in the little cafeteria, like that was, I mean, thinking back on it now, like that was a wild time of life. Just trying to balance everything at once. But exhaustion to a new level is what it was.
Because I remember even, because with my belt, hers was more the mental side or the cognitive side. Yeah. Even reading a kid's book, when she was back to reading, she would have to take a nap afterwards because of how exhausting it was. Right. And so
even before the stroke, it was really hard for me. It was like really
you didn't like to read before,
but I knew how to read. Now it's like,
but it was really tiring, really right? Yeah. And so I imagine with the physical, again, you're trying to get the brain to do something that it's kind of forgotten or lost, or there's just not the connection there. Yeah. And so it's probably a similar thing, even though we think, well, no, that's cognitive and that's physical. They're very similar because it's still up there.
The same in the brain.
Processing center of the brain.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, how to describe, like, if you're looking at your hand, I remember thinking, like, my hand's out on the bed or something like that in the rehab center. Just thinking, like, move. And it's like, if you look at, like, a pen or something and you're just thinking in your brain, like actually trying to, like, move the pen and inanimate objects, like, I don't know, it takes all your energy and focus, and then it doesn't. Or then it like just barely twitches. You're like, hey, there was something. Right. But it's exhausting. It's just trying to
to not make light of it, but it's like, Yoda teaching Luke to use the Force.
Oh yeah.
Trying to get it to move. You're
Perfect
trying to focus.
Example. So, eventually it comes though, right? Bit by bit.
So you mentioned your your wife being there. Was she pretty involved in some of the physical therapies and everything? Or
because of her school schedule, she was only with me there on the weekends for that, or when she had the time off. My brother was in Colorado at the time doing an internship, and he immediately stopped that and came to actually stay with us. Okay. So she and I stayed at the inpatient. That's where we slept. Mm-hmm. They had a big enough room, which is super nice of them. Yeah. They got us a big room. And then he came and stayed actually in our apartment, but would come every day to be with me during physical therapy and stuff.
So you had somebody there with you.
And my parents, they were living in Seattle at the time. They flew down and stayed at like one of the hospital provided hotel rooms for 2 weeks to help kind of get things logistically set up and sorted out. And so they were there as well. And honestly, there's probably a lot that I'm forgetting as far as people and support and whatnot. But yeah, my brother was with me and wheel me down and then turn me over to the physical therapist. So sometimes walk through or be there, hover and stuff. But they would kind of trade off. But mostly my brother was there just because of my wife's work schedule and obligations and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I'm sure was tough on her to not be there. Mm-hmm. But sacrifice.
Right, I imagine, especially with it being that, again, a short time for the marriage, she probably wanted to be there
for sure.
A time, but knew that she had those other things to do.
I mean, she was there in the ICU, and the first week she was there 24/7, as I'm sure you were. When everything initially happened, you'd go home to check in on the kids, right?
Yeah.
And she would go and check in on our cats.
They wouldn't let me be there from 9 to 9. Well, they let me be there from 9 in the morning till 9 at night. Oh, really? And then because of COVID, I couldn't stay there, so they'd kick me out.
Oh, boy. That's
so
tough.
Then I'd spend the time with the kids. But yeah, I think that's a good a wrap up of kind of the physical therapy and occupational therapy. That's next time we'll talk about kind of the transitions at home, things that were different, things that you may have had to, approach differently than you did beforehand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And we'll talk about that on the next episode.
Thank you.